subscribing and leaving comments.
We just have a few more, I have a few more general comments regarding this meeting. It didn't seem necessary for the first two speakers, but their comments are pertinent for the following speakers, the first of which happens to be me, substituting. But these are rules of subject coverage that have been approved by the chairman of the anthropology department and by the university attorney general. I'm going to read the statement. International Society of Cryptozoology, 1989 Annual Public Meeting, Statement of Subject Area. Although its members have a broad range of interests, the International Society of Cryptozoology emphasizes a single topic in this annual meeting. This year's meeting is focused on the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, and related creatures. Cryptozoology is the biological study of unverified animals. Since this often includes reports of a controversial nature, some social science is also necessarily involved. Accordingly, the presentations, as well as public participation, must be oriented toward the scientific aspects of our topic area. Any considerations of paranormal phenomena that are outside the range of current science may be of interest, but they are not part of cryptozoology and are not appropriate at this meeting. Members of the Society ask for your cooperation to keep this meeting focused on the topic area and to avoid distractions. Now, I don't think I need to elaborate particularly on that. I think it's quite clearly stated. We hope in general to leave a few minutes after each talk for audience questions, as we did this morning. We're a little bit behind already, but as I said, I'm going to cut mine a little short. But in these questions, I hope you will all, again, remember that the number of subjects, topics within our area that are going to be covered by talks is going to be limited. The entire field of cryptozoology will not be covered, nor will the entire field of what I call squatchology. Now, we would like you people in questionings to address only the subject that is covered. Otherwise, we could diverge forever into all kinds of other things and not handle the material at hand. Other aspects can, of course, be discussed by any and all of you at free time, and we have very long lunch break for exactly this purpose. Now, also, university rules prohibit passing out of any literature or posting any notices without prior approval. This, of course, applies to all people present, including the society members, but a table where people can go get it, that is something else. But if somebody's trying to hand out handbills to you, they're violating the rules. Now, also, at the end of each morning and afternoon session, there will be a showing of some plaster casts of footprints, handprints, and other interesting items for a half hour each time. This would be from 12 to 12:30 if we're on schedule, and likewise from 5:30 to 6. And this is going to be at College Hall, the next building up here where most of you were for our social hour this morning. The second floor, that's one higher, and at the east end of the building, room 205. Since there's a limit to the size of the room, we may just let about 30 people in. If 30 people come, and then we just lock the door. That's too bad. But that's just the first session. That will be open again and again. We can't have a whole crowd of people in there. A couple of us, myself and a graduate student, will be answering questions. And copies of a number of these casts will be available for sale if some of you are interested. Now, that's enough of my comments as moderator for this moment. And now I want to get on to an actual short paper. This is a paper that I just pulled together very quickly to fill in because Frank Portier is missing. And I thought it might be at least mildly interesting. The title I wrote down here, Skeptical Comments, was deliberately picked. I thought of it just as I wrote it down. There was a recent issue of a magazine called The Skeptical Inquirer, which had two articles relating to the footprint evidence from the Blue Mountain area near Walla Walla. And this journal and a couple of other articles elsewhere, I'm going to mention later, called forth a little bit of comment. Normally I don't bother with a publication like this to even answer anything, but here I thought some of it might be pertinent. The first article by a writer who made a rather lengthy, I would call it quite simply, denunciation of all the Blue Mountain tracks, was, in the opinion of myself and most people who are familiar with it, sufficiently inaccurate and so distorted to be unworthy of further comment. Yeah. The second article by two authors raised a rather good point about the tracks that showed dermal ridges, and I would like to address that because I think it is an interesting point and show you the reasons why I have done what I've done with it. The problem relates to the dermal ridges. Now, I think most of you know what these are, but some don't. They're the little ridged lines that make up fingerprints. They're spaced 0.5 millimeter apart on average on your fingertips, also over the entire palm of your hand, on the underside of your toes, and the entire sole of your foot. These are found in all higher primates, apes, monkeys, and humans. And the full coverage is not found in any other animal. Well, these, or something that looked like this, appeared on some of the tracks, especially those found in 1982 in the Blue Mountains. One of the curious things about those dermal ridges is that there were some extra spots that created some interest, and it was those extra spots that caused our problem. If you imagine these lines I've drawn are the furrows down at the bottom between the ridges, and this is 0.5 millimeter here. Along the ridges, there were little spots placed something like this. And these were identified initially by a pathologist named Walter Berkby at the University of Arizona. He said they are sweat pores. I thought that sounded like an interesting explanation of them. I had noticed the little spots there, but I didn't know for sure what they might be. They not only appear as little spots, but they also bulge out to the side, like they widen the ridge a little bit. They also occur fairly regularly, 0.5 millimeter apart, and they tend to line up from one ridge to another, lines running this way. Well, since the first identification, and when I took the tracks out for many other fingerprint experts around this country and much of the world to examine, sometimes I pointed these out and asked what they thought they were. Sometimes I just waited and they spotted them. All of the fingerprint experts said they were sweat pores. Since they said so, I said, well, yeah, who am I to say otherwise? The article in the Skeptical Inquirer says, I'm the one who identified them as sweat pores. No, I'm just going along as one of the sheep following the herd. Well, the experts on this sort of thing were fully convinced, but some of them were puzzled a little bit by why they were not shaped the way they ought to be. There was a difference in their shape, but that they were sweat pores seemed unquestionable to everyone that I talked to. Now, a question about this was first raised not by the authors of the article in the Skeptical Inquirer many years ago, about a year after the footprints were found, by a Timothy White, physical anthropologist, University of California, Berkeley. He thought maybe, just maybe, these are not sweat pores, but if you take a cross-section, there's a ridge, a furrow, a ridge, a furrow, a ridge, a furrow. If you imagine this is the foot that makes a print, and that's only 0.5 millimeter apart, it comes down onto the dirt, that the sweat pores, of course, are located here on the ridges. Therefore, if there is a sweat pore, it will appear as a little bit of dirt sticking up into the pore. What Tim White suggested was that after the foot has gone and you have the dirt and somebody pours plaster in, that a small air bubble might be trapped at the bottom of one of those furrows. It's the ridge of the foot, but becomes a furrow in the dirt. And that when the plaster hardens, the plaster gets hot, the air expands, and you get a little bit of bulge, and you can get an excellent fake sweat pore. Yeah, you can. There were a few of those in these tracks. I was a little bit concerned about that, so I performed the test. And what I thought would be a valid test would be, not like the articles, the authors of the article in question, using some dirt lusts that they got shipped in from central Washington. I got one sample right from the Blue Mountains. And not with special plaster, the best that they could buy. I used the very same kind of plaster that the Forest Service used in making the track cast. I duplicated the original exactly instead of trying to go for some kind of perfection. Well, if you're going to test for this, what occurred to me the most obvious thing is to put something like dermal ridges into the piece of dirt and make a cast of it, but put ridges in that could not possibly have sweat pores. Not a thing like this could possibly exist, but bubbles might be expected. It's very simple. I got a fine comb, laid it down, drag it over, got the finer side, dragged it over the other side of the piece, made a cast, and got the result. Well, if we can get the slide projector going, and the slides, I want to show you two slides of the result of this. There should be two slides separated from all the rest of it. Whoops. Okay, let's focus down on that as close as we can. Yeah. Now, a lot of you in the back of the room can't see it, but the clearest example is right along here. There's a series of lines that show up best, and sweat pores or bubbles, something is occurring, and you can quite often follow them in lines from one ridge to another. Roughly 0.5 millimeter apart lines this way, while the ridges run that way. But they mix it up a little bit here and there. Now, if I got things like that in the cast made from the teeth of a comb, where I know there are no sweat pores or nothing of the kind, and they were comparable, then of course these are not sweat pores, and part of the evidence falls. Let's try the next slide. I'm not sure if we can get a perfect focus on this, but we'll do the best we can. The original comb, these teeth lined up this way were spaced 2 millimeters apart. That's 4 times as wide as the dermal ridges. And you can clearly see some air bubbles. They do occur. Not very many, not nearly as many as on the track, and they occur at random locations. The other side of the comb, where the teeth were spaced 1 millimeter apart, now just twice the spacing of the dermal ridges, there are a few bubbles. There's one here. There are also some at occasional places that are not on the ridges, but on other places. So the regularity falls apart. The frequency of the bubbles is negligible. They have no tendency to line up. There's not enough of them to line up. And while the case for the finer teeth comb is negligible, the case for the wider teeth is even worse. So if you were to project one step still finer, it's unlikely that you could get anything that constitutes any problem with the original tracks. Could you go back one slide just to take one quick look back at the Walla track? Good. Here again, please remember these are 0.5 millimeter apart for each of these lines, and you can see a whole series of these things that tend to be lined up. Within this little square here, there must be 15, 20 of them. the same area on my experiment, there was at best one. Well, I considered that sufficient that I didn't have to worry about this detail. The authors of the article that criticized it didn't contact me, or I would have informed them of the results that I had. Okay, enough for the slide. Let's have the lights back on. Okay. There's one other argument that has appeared regarding those footprints. One appeared in a letter in a recent issue of Newsweek magazine, letter to the editor following a short article they ran on the subject. And its claim was that normal human track casts could be used to make these. The way it would be done is you put your foot in the ground in the fine soil, you make a plaster cast of it, turn it over, paint a latex mold over it, okay? So peel the latex mold off, soak the latex mold in kerosene, and then expands. It will expand about half again, quite easily. That gets you to the right size. You then put plaster on the inside of that, make a plaster cast, take your plaster cast out into some finely prepared dirt, stamp it in, and then cast that. It's a whole series of steps. But what you get is dermal ridges, sweat pores, and everything from a perfectly normal human foot expanded to a half again bigger. And you come out with a plaster cast of it. So the dermal ridges and sweat pores would be perfectly real, but they come from a human foot, not a monster. Another article in...
Excuse me, could I interject one thing on that?
Quickly, yeah.
I have been in correspondence with that individual erratically because he was often told on corresponding with me about this. He's a professor of geology. He's a young chap, a little conceited, I think. I asked him, you have run a class course. They ran a one-semester course there on dealing with the paranormal. I got the prospectus. It did nothing in the way of field experimentation. I asked him, have you done this? You presented a theory. You've given me the book in which it tells about how this can be done. Have you actually performed this experiment to see if it works? He said no, and implied that since the book said it could be done, not referring to Bigfoot, but simply on making casting larges this way, that there was no need to perform the experiment. I regard this as typical armchair skepticism having no validity whatsoever.
Thank you. Another expert, by the way, did the same thing from California. He's an actual anthropologist. He had a short note in the scientific journal Current Anthropology where he made essentially the same point, very simply stated. Well, I knew from the beginning that you could enlarge latex molds with kerosene. That's old hat. Anybody who does casting knows that. But if you enlarge a foot mold with kerosene, you're enlarging the length, the width, the size and spacing of all the dermal ridges. All higher primates have dermal ridges spaced on an average of half a millimeter apart. If you ran through this with these things with latex mold expansion, then they would all be 3/4 of a millimeter apart. And I measured them all over the foot, and they're half a millimeter. And that's the first thing that all of the fingerprint experts looked at. Would this be a human foot enlarged? Oh, okay, no, we remove that. And then they go on to look at the real stuff. First thing taken care of, first thing dismissed. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people, as you say, the armchairs, who think all they have to do is propose a possible solution, and that solves the whole thing. Okay, well that is all I am going to say on that subject. And I want to introduce our next speaker.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.